Hi, this is Marjohn Love, and this is Marjohn's Musings. There's going to be some nudity in the show, so if you're a sensitive sort and find that objectionable, come back and see us next time. So we're back, and what I'd like to show you is one of my favorite pieces of religious art. This painting here is called the Madonna of the Streets. And if you look carefully, the mother is young and she has this big, heavy baby to carry. I love the piece because she's not portrayed as a wealthy Madonna covered in pearls, sitting in a medieval castle with a view of the window out overlooking, Florence or whatever. She's just a young woman carrying a heavy baby. It's actually one of my favorite pieces. There was a period in Europe where the figure predominated art, but it was used in allegorical fashion. The figure was costumed and positioned in certain ways so that it represented myths and legends and passages from the Bible. And this Madonna is actually some young girl. And is that her baby, the baby Jesus, or is that her baby brother that she's minding for her mom? What we see is a mother and child. In the next piece I want to show you, it's called America by Vespucci. It's a huge bronze. I have an old sepia-toned print of it. It's outside the Museum d'Orsay. Now, d'Orsay used to be a huge train station, but with the advent of automobiles and the RER, they came up with better, more modern, although nowhere near as beautiful, train stations. Go into this gorgeous palace of glass and light, molded cement building blocks that look like they're carved into flower motifs. There's a painting in there of Jesus and the 12 apostles, and Jesus is in pink robes. It looks like a gay guy's picnic. These half-dressed men, some of them startlingly nude, standing around Jesus in his pink robes. It was a very disturbing image for me in some ways. I didn't know quite what to make of it. But outside, there were these gorgeous statues. This one here, America, it's a Caucasian woman dressed in Native American costume, done up in bronze. It's rather an odd, eerie, interesting image. I really liked her. One of the things that she has going on is a sword. And as I told you, when I rang this bell of the saint for students, if you peek, it has a sword. I got it at the Floating Lotus. Well, they had a leather wallet that had a window cut out of the leather, and they had this image. But if you look carefully, Manjushri in the bell is a man. The image was sold to me as Tara, a goddess. But because of the position of the right arm aloft, I thought, gee, I wonder, I'll lay odds this is Manjushri. So I went home, and the leather had been held. This thing must weigh, I don't know, a good 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds. And it had been in this leather wallet up against the body of a monk on a neck strap for years, many years. And it had an odor. And so I was curious about the whole image, but I was also curious about this arm. and I cut away this leather. Sure enough, there in the right hand is the flaming sword that cuts through illusion. Now, I thought that this was a Buddhist image, that it originated with the Lord Buddha. I thought about that a lot. But I have this book. It's called the Chakra Bible. I'm trying to learn about the healing properties of stones, different elixirs and crystals and things. Prior to anatomists, people perceive the body as having lines of force that went through it, and they undulated the nadis. One is blue and one is red. One descends and one rises. And then there's the central channel for the breath. And when Westerners got to the East and they heard about this, they had dissected bodies. They thought, there's no channels like that. That must be rubbish. And it was dismissed, and the American medical establishment decided that the body was like a clock. You know, a male-dominated medical practice came about at the time of the Industrial Revolution and the beginnings of mechanisms of all sorts. And so the body was visualized as a machine. If you ever want to see the anatomist's skills taken to fine art level, and I do mean breathtaking fine art level, if you get the chance to see an exhibit called Body Works, there's a European anatomist who has taken the art of cadaver and made it artwork. You get to see the body dissected in interesting, shocking, strange, and beautiful ways. People donated their bodies to him, and he has basketball players and ballerinas. There's this one where he dissected the back and opened it up so you can see all the muscles and the tendons and the bones. It's called Angel. It's like in construction manuals, when you go to put something together, a machine, you go to put it together, they show you an exploded view. And that's what this anatomist did in this one piece he calls Angel. He takes the entire back and shoulder apart so that you can see everything that makes it up. But the sword that cuts through illusion, you know, it's a fascinating concept, and I didn't realize that it was a Hindu concept. It wasn't originally Buddhist at all. It was Hindu. And I'm reading through this book. Remember, I talked to you twice about Osho. First about the Osho card deck that I found fascinating, and then the new book that's Writings of Osho. This is one of Osho's followers. He's a sadhu, and he's dressed up in brilliant orange robes, and he has an orange bindi on his head, and he's covered in clay, not like a face powder, but in medieval times in the monasteries, monks who wanted to purge themselves of sin and wrongdoing would wear ashes and sackcloth. It's sort of like that. He's painted up in dirt. He's going to go through a ritual of purification. It's fascinating what people do with bodies. Like, I'm learning all about aromatherapy right now. And I went to the Common Crow in Gloucester and bought some beautiful therapeutic aromas. This image is of using specially scented oils in a purification ritual in bathing. I have a little burner that you put a tea light in. You put water and a dot of very pungent aromatic oil. I have a little fan, and I put the fan on. The scented oil fills the room. In this chakra Bible, which I get a little disturbed about all sorts of books calling themselves the Bible this, the Bible that, but it definitely is a pretty authoritative tome on the different chakras and what kind of herbs to use and what kind of yoga positions to use. I was recently at the opening at the Rockport Art Association of Out of Bounds 2014. I went to their delicious catered reception and ate things like fresh figs and wonderful cheeses and stuff, and peeked at the art. I must be getting old. My favorite painting in the show was of a Bichon. It was a portrait of Julia, and you knew, just looking at this little white dog, that the artist loved that dog. You could feel the love of the artist for the dog. My favorite of the modern pieces was one that I stood there trying to figure out how it was made. Was a diptych, 2 different pieces of 2 women together in each of the images. For those of you who are not, familiar, they were yoginis. I mean, they were twisted all around. And I have this catalog. It's from Eastern Serenity, and in it, it has this very, very heavy woman, even bigger than me. And it's called Yoga Fanatics, and you can get the bow pose, the westward pose, the boat pose, the easy pose, the cobra pose, and you can get this whole set of these really, really chubby figures doing yoga. Well, in the Rockport Art Association show, in the diptych, they had these 2 beautiful, shapely young women. I took some classes in graphic arts at North Shore Community College, and I'm standing there thinking, I wonder if they used Adobe Illustrator and did a clipping mask of these 2 beautiful young women. What a clipping mask is sort of like an outline. You outline the shape. Like this. You take the outline and you outline the shape, and then you can pick up that image, the selected image, and move it. And with modern digital photography, you can do what in the old days was called a double exposure. In the old days, you'd take your film camera out and you'd aim your film camera and you'd line up your shot, and you would do about half the time. And then you'd go to your second image and you'd do the other half of the time. It was called a double exposure. There was an art to it, and in the Metropolitan Museum of New York, there are several gorgeous double exposures. It was an innovation in photography. Rather than just one image, you combine 2. And I'm looking at these young ladies and I was like, wow, I bet that's what this is, because there they were looking like glass sculptures. And here's this swirling zebra pattern, like I showed you in my book. And these figures were superimposed on that zebra pattern, because I looked at them really carefully going, wait a minute, that isn't body paint like the Aboriginals or my sadhu that I just showed you used. And the one looked like it was blown glass, and the other looked like it was pottery. And the one had zebras, and the other was like rounded rectangle shapes. But what I loved in both of them was the hair. The hair was actually comb rendered. And I thought, how fascinating. There's a brush that you can use in Photoshop, but also in Illustrator, where you can take a photographic image and run this brush through and pull pixels of color. For those of you that are not up with the digital age, a pixel is a picture cell. I have this Peabody Essex Museum book of Turner postcards. This is Joseph Millard William Turner, which is the exhibit that's on now. And he had a way of working in brilliant yellow and blue. And I got this book full of his postcards to give as a gift to my friend Carol, and I'm going to send this to her, but I thought I'd get some use out of it on my TV show first. Turner took on the English aristocracy and the English very wealthy merchant class and said, listen, you know, allegorical images and figure paintings of historical scenes and mythological scenes are not the highest form of art. You can go out into the country and do a seascape of a seaport, and that's legitimate art too. And Turner made, I don't know how many paintings. It must be like in the hundreds. And he's very well known. And the show at the Peabody Essex is up for several months, so you can still get to see it. He does have little figures in his paintings, and some of them tell a story, but they're a small part of the story. In Japanese paintings, frequently you'll see these beautiful mountains. You know, Japan has Mount Fujiyama. I mean, there's hardly a mountain in the world that's more majestic and striking. Fujiyama is a volcanic mountain, and it has that beautiful conical shape. In a lot of early Chinese and Japanese paintings, you'll see this huge vista landscape, sometimes with water in it, cascades or rivers or streams, lakes, and then there'll be this little tiny figure. Kind of puts the person into perspective. It was sort of like my Aboriginal stick pointillist painting. You know, we think that the modern printing with colored dots that you see in a loop, if you put a jeweler's loop, you'll see all the little colored dots from the screens of the printing press. Well, that translated into television. Each picture cell in the back of an old-fashioned cathode ray tube was made of 3 different phosphors, a green, a red, and a blue. The green kind of took over the yellow that we think of when we paint. And depending on how the cathode ray tube struck those phosphor dots, that lit up your screen. And when we were kids back in the 50s, our parents would tell us, don't get too close to that screen. you'll get radiation, and you could. There was a cathode ray gun shooting back and forth down that tube. And the refresh rate was at least twice per second. Zing, 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 zing. Nowadays, we don't have that technology. Things have come to, flat screens. My husband sits there and reads books on his phone. I get eye strain doing that. I'm like, I prefer a real book I can hold in my hand. But I started this series talking to you about the difference between nudity and nakedness. I don't think that there's anybody who's over the age of 40 that can't remember going through a National Geographic's or Time or Life or one of the major magazines and not having seen naked people. Typically, they're under duress. Typically, they're not naked by choice. They're naked because they're impoverished or they're in a disaster or, something's happened. We tend to see the clothing of the body as something that's necessary. There's a phrase from a song that I used to like from Judy Collins, and it says, "Scarecrows dressed in the latest style, with frozen smiles to keep love away." I talked to you a little bit about my Buddha and how he has his hands in a meditation posture. And I talked to you about my healing center. And in the East, there's this idea of mudras. Now, mudras are hand positions that mean different things. So here's this beautiful model, and she has her hands in what in the West we consider a prayer pose. So she has a prayer pose. But there's all sorts of mudras. There's hundreds of them. And she has this other mudra that she's got her fingers locked. And they're the index fingers, and she's pulling them. And the mudra is for wisdom. People actually believed that taking these hand postures, different postures, would affect the body. And it could heal the body. It could bring energy to the body. So I'm learning more about mudras and chakras because, like I told you, my initial training for healing was in Christian laying on of hands. This is kind of an interesting one. She has her fingers done up and they come this way. And it's for concentration. And there's a whole breathing thing that you do. In the East, the idea of cutting open a corpse was abhorrent. If you think of India with the monsoon rains and whatever, for 6 months of the year, it's a very humid, hot place. And then there's the dry season. And during the wet season, a corpse would have been malodorous, to say the least, but probably dangerous. I mean, a dead body is meat. That's why, you know, when we talk about Jesus being incarnate, carne is meat. He became flesh. In the Eastern traditions, they talk about that too, that you become flesh. I was at Skidmore College at the International Women's Writers Guild. I was talking to this woman about this painting that I made of Jesus, which is up at this studio. She was a Jewish woman, and she had the opposite of anti-Semitism. It was sort of, if you weren't Jewish, she didn't like you, and if you were a self-espoused Christian, she really didn't like you. And she looked at me askance, and she said, the only good things Jesus ever said were Jewish. Well, sometimes people say things to you that are startling, and you need to kind of sit back and look at that. So I have a friend who's a bit of a rabbi and a teacher, and he got a hold of the Pentateuch for me in English so that I could learn about what are the old Jewish traditions that a lot of people perceive as the Bible. My husband recently saw a thing about Noah's Ark, and he goes, wait a minute, that's not how the story goes. And someone that was with him said, yes, it is. That's the Jewish version of Noah's Ark. And it's interesting that the Christian version of Noah's Ark has changed. I find as ideas move around the world, they change depending on who's speaking and who's listening. I brought you in this poster image. I wish I had the original, but I'm not that rich. This is a piece by Frederick Lord Lytton. Even though this figure has raiment, it's a nude. If you look carefully, you can see this girl's bum cheek. You can see her bosom. I mean, she's just as nude in her own way as my image of the foreshortening fiasco. This one is called Flaming June, and I brought her in today because this is my last show of summer. We'll start a new series again in the fall, but for right now, this is the end of Marjohn's Musings for the year 2013-2014. This, believe it or not, is the 12th episode. And Frederick Lord Lytton has set this Flaming June in a seascape scene. It's kind of faded a little because I don't know that the poster was archival, but that white stripe is the sea and cliffs in the background. And here's this, architectural features. And here's this girl. I think she probably woke up with a crick in her neck. And here's this brown drapery. And when you get up close, you see that this brunette woman, she has hair a little more chestnut than mine, just has normal hair. Her hair really doesn't go all the way down to the floor. That's just a big scarf. I spoke to you a little while ago about the figure. There's a whole different set of figure drawing that isn't fine art at all, and it's not commercial art in the sense of Turner's fine art that was for sale. There's kind of a weirdness about that. I think we're as conflicted and crazy about art as we are about food. There's an image of the Buddha, and he's sitting in meditation with ascetics, and it's prior to his enlightenment. He got down to eating 1 seed a day, and think of like a large almond. That's what he ingested, and water if it rained. I think some of these tales are a bit apocryphal, but they show him in a state of such emaciation that you see his rib, each and every one of his ribs. You can count each and every one of his ribs. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was a fashion model. I used to runway model for lit juniors and lit teens. And I did some photography modeling. And they would lie to the girls and they would say, the camera puts 20 pounds on you, so to look normal, you have to lose 20 pounds. I think that was the beginning of my weight problem. I dieted from 117 pounds down to 104 pounds, at which point they thought I was thin enough for the clothing to drape properly. And there's a whole subset of artwork for the fashion industry. All sorts of images of models wearing clothing, and models for television, and models for sports figures, and the difference between portraiture and caricature. There's a fine line there. I mean, every portrait is a caricature if you think about it. You've taken graphite or pen and ink or acrylic or oil or pastel, and you've captured a likeness as the artist of what you see. What you see is not the person. Who they are is inside themselves. Since my son's here today, I had to bring this. This was one of the most fun things we did when he was a kid. This is called Hanimals. Sort of like the Mudra book. It's hands, painted hands. All sorts of painted hands. We would get special body paint and we'd paint up our hands and we'd do geese, donkeys and zebras. It was fun. There's times that I miss being young, but I have this Chinese expression up on my altar right now that says, 1,000 blossoms in springtime, warm nights of summer, delicious harvest of autumn, the warm fire in winter. To those who are awake, this is the best season of your life. And the Buddha taught that you can only ever live in the now. Well, in the now, art's changing. This book has a CD-ROM in it, and it's people and poses. And it shows perspectives that are unusual for fine art. Now, if you go all the way back to the paintings of the Iliad and the Odyssey and the great Greek dramas and biblical portraiture, you will see some of these. But these are the kinds of poses that are used in graphic novels and comic books. And the art community poo-poos that and goes, that's not real art. You know, and of course, here's this shapely young model in her, you know, leotard and her skin-tight shorts, and she's wielding a sword. There is something interesting and campy about it. Here's this guy, and he's like got this cloak, you know, like, I don't know, ghouly kind of Halloween-y cloak. And he's in all these campy poses. But what these are for is to give the artist a reference of people in action. And I have other books like this. I could have brought the entire library, but I needed a truck. So the next artist I'd like to talk to you about is William Bouguereau. He was a salon painter. And as you can see from the cover of this book, he did allegorical paintings. This is one of his bacchanals in the spring. I wanted to show you one of my favorites that he did. It's called Le Printemps. It means the coming of the spring. I actually got to see this paint, the Jocelyn Art Museum. I did a weaving of two different sides of a mountain. Got accepted into the Western Artists exhibit by a woman who discovered Andy Warhol. And I thought my ship had come in, you know. I thought, wow, this woman who discovered Andy Warhol discovered me, and now I'm in this show. So I have the book that the Jocelyn put out of the show. I was having a panic attack. Like I told you, when I was young, I had a whole lot of issues about my body image and what I look like. No matter how much jewelry or makeup or hairdos or fancy expensive clothing, I never felt like I was at home in my own body. I was never good enough. I wasn't who I ought to be. For who, I didn't know, but I wasn't good enough. I look back at those old pictures, boy, what I wouldn't give to be that person now. This image from Bouguereau that hung in the Jocelyn, it's Le Printemps, and it was vandalized 6 different times. One guy actually picked up a chair and smashed it into the canvas and tore the canvas, and it had to be repaired. I love the image, and at the time you couldn't get any images of it except for a greeting card. This piece is bootlegged. I hate to confess to that. And I snuck a camera into the Jocelyn and shot a photo of this and had it mounted on board. What happens to you sometimes when you do things like that? This little cupie, this little pootie in the background here looked like my Andrew. And when the print came back from the print shop, they'd cut his head in half. I was so upset and disappointed. But the reason that this naked woman was vandalized is she's supposed to be eros. She's supposed to be erotic. And there we are in Nebraska. You know, we're in the middle of the Bible Belt, and people came in and saw this naked woman in the throes of eroticism. One guy stabbed it. Like I said, this guy pitched a chair through it. A woman wasn't supposed to be that sexy and happy and naked all at the same time. I don't know about that. I love the image. I have a friend. His name is Judd. He got some friends of his to sponsor him to have a one-man show on the Bearskin Neck. And my husband and I got all dressed up and we went there. And we purchased this piece, which is, you know, it's kind of like my poster. He had a photo, printed it off on a color jet printer at home, stuck it to a piece of blue backer board, and used a paper clip with a piece of foam tape, not archival. It certainly wouldn't get hung in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts this way. But I love it. He went to a thrift shop, sort of like the Second Glance, and got himself a suit. And then he covered his face in silver grease paint, theatrical grease paint, and did the backs of his hands. And he had a friend with a spray can, so wonder the poor guy didn't asphyxiate, spray paint him in the suit in silver. And then he stood in a bathroom like a mannequin and posed in this bathroom. And people would come in the bathroom and he stood so still. Some of the people actually thought that he was a mannequin. And he took one of these computer programs and picked up the texture of the clear vinyl shower curtain and superimposed it over his image as if he was like looking through this vinyl shower curtain, which actually stops here. In the actual photo, the shower curtain stops here. This is all special effects. But I thought it was kind of wonderful. That was the only image that the museum had to offer, this little postcard. And I've saved it since Andrew was 4. I only have a couple of more minutes left, but I wanted to share this with you. This is Blueberry Head, and it's by a local artist, a woman artist, Betty Lou Schlem. I bought it for my husband for his birthday. But Betty Lou is an art teacher, and she selected the images with Tom Nicholas for the best of watercolor. When she had her big one-woman show benefit, I bought this piece. And the boy on the horse is naked. And when I look at this piece, being an artist and having taught art, I say, oh, she was doing this as an instruction in lost and found edges. And if you look carefully, you can see that the horse merges into the background here, but that she's used some dots of green and brown in here to bring out the horse's form. And the hoof has a dark mark, but then a very bright one, so that you see this entire foreleg. And she has a foreground, a midground, and a background. She talked to me at dinner one night about how she'd been teaching going on 45 years. And although she loved her students, she wondered if they were ever going to outgrow her, you know, grow up and move on. This boy is naked, but he's not nude. It's kind of an odd thing. That's all for today. This is Marjohn's Musings. We'll see you in the fall. Come in with a bang. I'm not sure quite what I'm going to do my next show about. If you have any suggestions, send them to my P.O. box. I peek in there all the time, and mostly what I get is stuff from Comcast. So write to me. Bye for now.